Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session. Today, we're going to discuss a couple of key topics in the energy sector. And as we've often said, when we talk about energy and excise taxes, we deal with complexity. And the other big challenge that we have is change. Changes in the industry, changes in regulation and enforcement. They're just a common theme within our part of the industry. So as we move forward, we're going to talk about a couple of key topics today, and especially three big topics. And those three big topics are next-gen fuels, Superfund, and ERP migrations. So most of you have heard about the Superfund, and if you haven't, that's okay. We're going to go into a little bit more detail later. And ERP migrations, as they deal with systems, it's a really large deal right now. Historically, energy companies have not been early adopters of new technology, but now there's a trend and they're hurrying to catch up. So we'll discuss that as well. But before we do, let me welcome our guests today. From Phillips 66, we have Kerry Creager, and from BP, we have Ed Greenstein. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for being here. So first off, why don't we talk about next-gen fuels? Traditionally, when we talk about the term alternative fuels, most people immediately think about ethanol and biodiesel. But there's been a lot of change in this sector, and we're seeing a lot of new things coming, then approaching a different way of approaching fuel altogether, like how the industry is creating fuel from biomass material, hence the name Next Gen. So both your companies are pretty invested here. What can you tell us about next-gen fuels? Kerry?
Yeah, John, there's absolutely a big push in this space. Oil and gas companies have always led the way in reducing emissions and protecting our environment. Now, we have been helped along this path by ever-increasing environmental and regulatory requirements, which we have to meet. So at Phillips 66, what we're doing, we're currently converting our Rodeo refinery into a renewable fuels facility. And that's what you're seeing across the industry, whole refinery operations being switched over to produce renewable fuels. This means some new challenges for indirect tax professionals. First, you've got to deal with the closure and the drawing down of the facilities and the inventories. You've got a whole host of issues around the decommissioning of the infrastructure, and you really need to get smart quickly about the available production credits for renewable fuels. And some of this is still up in the air with regards to sustainable aviation fuel, for example. That's a part of the Build Back Better proposal that has stalled. So there are a lot of challenges. One big challenge for the industry is the sourcing of all that renewable feedstock. When you scale up like this, with many others doing it at the same time, that's a real problem. So Phillips, for example, we've been working to develop a real infrastructure to get used cooking oils and similar materials from the interior South American countries and other countries to help ensure we can get that feedstock. So it is a big change. There's many opportunities and challenges for us in the industry right now.
I agree. And Ed, what are your thoughts? Some of the challenges?
Yeah, so very similar to the comments that Kerry just made. BP is making big contributions into updating the refineries. We've got big push in our Cherry Point refinery in Washington State to change it to not only produce fuel from conventional crude oils, but also to bring in, like Kerry said, biomass products, vegetable oils, animal fats. Yeah. We're doing a lot of that out there. And, just like Kerry said, some of that is internal based off of our own requirements as a company, but also you're seeing a big push from the California low carbon fuel standards that are out there. And, I've spoken with counterparts in other refineries, and they're doing similar things. They're changing their refineries to, produce not just from conventional crudes, but from also some different biomass type products, and again creating these renewable fuels that we're going to see for the future.
And I think, and we're not even talking yet some of the new topics around nitrogen fuel, right? But it's biomass as a fuel. It's not brand new, but I think now coupled with the pressure against fossil fuels, and the administration, And our organizations are trying to have a low carbon footprint. And these fuels definitely have a much lower carbon footprint. I think we're going to continue to see more stuff there, right, Kerry?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I would mention in this space, if you are pivoting, if your company's pivoting more towards renewable fuels, I'd highly encourage you to look at all incentives and credits, and I would include a look at enterprise zones and those special programs that you have to apply for and be approved to be a part of. Because some of those things traditionally our oil and gas projects don't qualify for, but the green initiatives are seen very favorably. So I do encourage you to look into those.
Yeah, and just to add one more piece to that, a lot of this is driven by credits and refunds that are out there for these bioproducts. One thing that's interesting is on our side with the biomass, we were taking credits, but the way that those fuels were set up, they actually qualified as alternative fuels. And so the alternative fuel mixture credit recently expired at the end of last year.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing that, we're fighting with credits and as well as what's going to happen with biodiesel credits that are set to expire as well.
No, absolutely. And it's something we have to track. I mean, in our industry, we're not traditionally known for evolving, but yeah, we're evolving and there's continual change. So it's really fascinating to be where we are today. So talk about evolution. That's a good time to talk about the Superfund. So the Superfund, for those that may not be aware, it's a new tax, but it's not really a new tax. It's an old tax, which we've brought back. So with the infrastructure bill, there was an amendment which brought back the Superfund. And the Superfund is basically a tax on 42 different chemicals. And the purpose of this is a federal excise tax on 42 chemicals in order to offset the cost of remediation for hazardous spill sites, right? And the reason it's very topical for us is on that list, there are around 9 to 12 chemicals which are prevalent in the oil and gas industry. Everyone's really focused, and you have to be compliant by July 1st. So in typical fashion, the federal government has passed a regulation and given us 6 months, a little less, to get compliant, right? So Ed, what are your thoughts on Superfund?
My first thought, John, is we don't have enough time to go through the hours we can spend on this topic. But, high level, you mentioned the 42 chemicals. Yes, there's a tax on the production, the domestic production or the import of these chemicals, where the tax is then imposed when those chemicals are sold or used. Additionally, there's a tax on what we're calling chemical products or substances that contain these actual chemicals. So one thing that we're seeing is that, you mentioned 42 chemicals and there's over 100 of these substances out there. But when you look at the old rules, they talked about those substances containing at least 50% of the chemicals. Yep. They've now amended that to say they only have to contain 20%. So we're really expecting to see a much longer list now coming out of these substances. So, there's again, we can talk for days about this, but I do want to mention there's a 637 registration that many don't know that are linked to the Superfund tax, which is the G activity letter. So folks have until the imposition of this tax to register with the IRS.
Right.
And yeah, so,
well, and
there's
that's a great point,
this.
right? I mean, we have to look at the volumetric measurement, which is not new to us in excise, and we have to get down to the percentages similar to blending, right? So, Kerry, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, obviously, you mentioned the big brain drain, right? So that was the big shock to everyone, is that the people that knew this, they're either retired or they're no longer with us, and so this is an old tax that's come back. I would say on the sales side, you have a lot more control because you know what you sell. You know the composition of those items, and it's a much more finite list. On the purchase side, that's where it really becomes much more expansive. So there's lots of elements and chemicals and things that you may, and I'm speaking from a refinery perspective, that we may procure and use. And those are things that we may not be as privy to the chemical makeup and composition. And as Ed mentioned, you've got the 20% threshold for the chemicals. And so I think that the amount of disruption that you're going to see on the purchase side is really to be determined. And we'll see as this moves forward how the vendors invoice and how we see those taxes appearing.
Right. Yeah, to add to Kerry's points there, one unknown right now is how are companies going to determine whether they put this as a line item or include it in the product cost, right? And so why is that important? Well, down the line, if you've got a taxable chemical that's ultimately exported or used in a non-taxable way, and you're eligible for a refund, how are you going to prove to the IRS that you paid the tax if it's not invoiced on, as a line item when you purchased it? So
yeah,
still some unknowns out there.
I agree, and that's an excellent point, right? When the Superfund first came back, or when it first broached our desk, a lot of people focused on calculation. But you're right, it's not just calculation. We have to track it, we have to report on it. There's a compliance element at the federal level. And on top of that, like you said, we have to track the entire supply chain, because if we're eligible for credits based upon an export, we need to be able to track this. So it's a pretty large undertaking, but again, not the first time this has happened to us, but certainly we're focused on it as we move forward. So, one of the comments you made, Kerry, that I really appreciated was when we talk about the brain drain, and we talk about people that have left, and there are very few people around that remember the old Superfund, but it kind of is a good segue into our next topic, which are ERP migrations. So I don't want to give away our ages, but I think most of us remember mainframe systems. And in the oil and gas industry, when I first started, most systems were run on a mainframe. And then the oil and gas industry made a transition to client-server technology, which was, we have a server room, and we would run all of our software in there. There were probably 20, 30, 40 servers and backup locations somewhere else. But now there's new technology. And over the last 10 years, most industries have been adopting ERP systems in the cloud. And now currently we see that migration to cloud technologies in the oil and gas industry finally picking up. We see more adoption, more momentum building. And I think it's a very hot topic for most people in our audience. So, Kerry, you guys have just recently been an early adopter. Can you share with us some of the benefits of moving to the cloud and a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have just recently implemented Avalara ATE for all of our U.S. Motor fuels tax determinations. So we finished our implementation. We're done. We're through everything it's in. However, we're still not fully implemented in S4. So we're waiting on the project to catch up a little bit. In the past, Phillips 66 was very staunchly resistant to hosted solutions. We wanted to maintain our data. We wanted to control all of our updates. And certainly we were one of the worst, I would say. We're not very progressive in this space. With the project, every bit of that has changed. We were pressured to move everything that we can to the cloud to avoid customization in SAP. And there was a significant amount of pressure to move to vended solutions where we could. So I see this trend continuing. I think that there's going to be more pressure to outsource or automate compliance and decisions. And I do think that the push really is get as much of that out as you can and focus your staff on value-added activities.
Right. And Ed, what about BP?
Yeah, so similar to Kerry's points, again, where they've already outsourced their compliance, so has BP. And as part of that, what we're seeing is, hey, we don't have to, host our data here on premise and have all these servers running and, a team of folks supporting that. So we are starting to make that move out to the cloud. And I think that, obviously that's the future. And like Kerry said, it's sometimes it's a little difficult to let go, right?
Right. Well, and I've always said that adopting technology for the sake of it is a bad move. It has to make sense. And Certainly, SaaS solutions offer a lower cost profile for customers. You don't have to maintain a server room full of 20 servers with a backup remediation site. Your vendor is actually doing all of that for you. And you also get, there's a lot of advantages that we can go into. We could spend another hour on that, I'm sure. But one of the things I really appreciated about what Kerry's team did in their implementation is they were involved early. So often in an ERP implementation, what happens is 6 months before go live, somebody says, what are we going to do about tax? And I know Kerry's team was really involved early and really focused on the data mapping. Kerry, what do you think? Do you think that was really key to your success?
Oh, absolutely. The biggest advice I can give anyone who is at the early stages of their journey in this space is that you really need to look at your requirements as a department. Look at everything that you must have and what you do to get your work done, especially in the tax space. And you break that into 3 categories. You list what is your regulatory requirements, and that's mandated by law. You list what's necessary to meet those regulatory requirements, because that can be a whole separate set of data and information. And then you list what are your nice to haves. If you do this early and you do it in detail, what it allows you to do is it allows you to stack hands as a department and have a singular message. It allows you to push for what you must have, what you need, and what you would like appropriately. And what that does is it provides you a wall of rigidity that is not confrontational and it's immovable. So if you have certain resources that are in one meeting, because these meetings they're all over the place, there's many of them going on at one time, they don't have to come back and ask if this is something I need to push for, how important is this or how important it isn't it. You really draw that line very early on, because indirect tax is connected to almost every function that you're going to set up, whether it's the information in the business partner system or it's the way that you account for general ledger entries. It's the way that you set up. Every bit of it has some hook into indirect tax. So very, very important for you to do that. I will also say that migration takes a lot of resources. So I think we're on our 4th year at the moment. So we're early in, and we're yet to complete our SAP worldwide implementation. We're very close. But because of that amount of resources, you've really got to start early. When they start the pre-planning, you got to jump in from an indirect tax perspective. You've got to devote enough of your internal resources. And I can't stress this last part too much. You really have to have the right partners for your tax implementation. And I'm not speaking specifically for the software solution. What I'm speaking about is the people that help that solution work. At Phillips 66, we were successful in choosing our own tax implementation partners. And I think that was a big, big part of why we're done well ahead of the project, because we were able to get that help.
That's fantastic. Yeah, when I was very, very young, some of the best advice I ever received was, if you want to be successful, no surprises. So, lots of planning up front, engagement with the team making those decisions, absolutely. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your insight, your expertise, and as always, we really do appreciate your participation. And I look forward to working with both of you in the future, as always, and thank you very much.